Before anything else, I need you to release something. The quiet guilt you have been carrying this week, the feeling that heaven has been closer to other people than to you, the sense that maybe somewhere along the way you stopped being someone that signs are sent to. Let that go before this begins, because what I am about to tell you is the direct opposite of that story. God sent you 7 signs this week, not 2, not a vague feeling. 7 specific, deliberately crafted, precisely timed. They moved through your days like dispatches from a realm that does not operate on your calendar or honor your busyness. They arrived in the texture of ordinary moments, in a pause you filled with noise, in a conversation you did not fully enter, in a stillness your body felt, but your mind refused to sit in. You were not ignoring them. You were not faithless. You were running on a frequency that the world trained you to live on. And on that frequency, the language of heaven becomes hard to hear. That is not a failure. That is a fact. And it is precisely why this message exists. God does not send 7 signs to someone ordinary. He does not exhaust his pursuit on people he has not set apart. The volume of his reaching tells you everything about the weight of what he is trying to give you. We are going to count them together. And by the 7th, nothing about your ordinary days will look ordinary again. Before I name the first sign, I need to tell you something about the world you have been living in. Not the version you present, the real one. Think about this past week. You woke up and before your eyes had fully adjusted to the light, the demands were already there. Messages that needed replies, responsibilities that needed managing, people who needed something from you. And you got up and handled it, because that is what you do. That is what you have always done. By the middle of most days this week, you were operating on a kind of autopilot that the people around you would have mistaken for being fine, and maybe, part of you, convinced yourself that you were fine. But underneath all the managing, underneath the pace, there was something quieter trying to get your attention. A pull, a whisper, a moment of stillness that kept surfacing and kept getting pushed back under by the next thing on the list. You were not spiritually absent. You were simply running too fast for the sacred to catch you. Here is something that most people are never told. Every child carries a natural inner openness, a kind of receiver that is always on. You have seen it. Children notice things. Adults walk straight past. They feel the atmosphere of a room the moment they enter it. They hear what is not being said. They are not more spiritual than adults. They are simply running on a frequency that the world has not yet had time to suppress. Scientists who study the brain have a name for this frequency. It is the gamma state, the brainwave pattern tied to heightened awareness, to sharp intuition, to clarity that feels almost miraculous. And the research that has come out of institutions like MIT and Harvard tells a consistent story. This frequency begins to decline in most people around the age of 7, not because of illness. Because of the environment, because of the noise, the pressure, the survival mode that modern life requires. The chosen one is not exempt from this. In fact, because you were born with a higher natural level of this frequency than most people around you, you feel the gap more. The distance between who you were as a child, wide open and quick to receive, and who you have had to become as an adult, who fights for every moment of stillness. That gap is real. And it is the reason 6 signs moved through your week and left without being recognized. But here is what changes today. I am going to name all 7 signs. I am going to tell you exactly what each one was, why it arrived the way it did, and what was being communicated through it. I am also going to give you something practical, a way to recalibrate your inner receiver so these signs are never invisible to you again. And by the time we reach the 7th sign, and I am asking you to stay with me until we get there, because the 7th one will reframe everything that came before it. You will not leave this the same way you arrived. Everything I cover before that 7th sign is preparation for it. Stay until the end. The first sign. It arrived in the dark. Somewhere this week, maybe more than once. You woke between 2 and 4 in the morning with no clear reason, no sound outside, no alarm. Just you, suddenly alert, in the middle of the night, with a kind of wakefulness that did not belong to that hour. Maybe your mind went straight to the list. Maybe anxiety moved in the moment your eyes opened. Maybe you reached for your phone just to fill the silence. Most people do one of those three things, and most people go back to sleep having received nothing. But that waking was not random. In the ancient world, the hours between midnight and dawn were understood as the watch hours, the time when the space between the visible and invisible was thinnest, when the communication of heaven was most likely to come through without interference. Elijah understood this from personal experience. He had run himself into complete exhaustion, spiritually emptied, physically collapsed, sitting under a tree, asking to be released from the weight of his own calling. And in that exact state, something reached him, twice, not with thunder, not with fire, with something as quiet and ordinary as a hand on the shoulder and an offering of bread. The most divine contact of that season came to him not at his strongest. It came when he had nothing left. What you experienced in those waking hours this week was not a malfunction of your sleep. Your body was not broken. What felt like restlessness was actually reception. What felt like an interrupted sleep pattern was actually a window being opened into a frequency you cannot access, while the noise of your waking life is turned all the way up. In the silence of the night, with your defenses down and your mental lists momentarily suspended, your spirit was being addressed. The question is, what do you do with it now? I want to give you something called the stillness protocol. It is simple. The next time you wake in those hours, before you reach for your phone, before you start the mental inventory, do one thing. Lie still and ask a single question, silently or quietly out loud. What is it? Just those 3 words. What is it? Then wait. Not for a voice, not for a vision, for an impression, a single word, or an image, or a sense of direction that surfaces before your mind can manufacture an explanation for it. If something comes, hold it, even one word, because what arrives in those hours is not your anxiety speaking. It is something far older and far more specific to you. The ones God prepares most deeply are prepared in secret, before the assignment ever becomes visible. The waking in the night was not a disruption. It was a preparation being delivered to a receiver that could only be opened in the dark. The second sign was harder to name than the first, because this one did not happen in the quiet. It happened in the middle of your ordinary life, in conversations you have had 100 times, in rooms you have known for years, in the company of people who should have felt familiar. This week, something shifted in how certain people and certain spaces felt to you. People you used to be around without much thought started feeling heavy. Conversations that used to pass without friction started leaving you drained in a way that was hard to explain. Environments that were once comfortable started feeling like they no longer fit the shape of who you are right now. And, if you are honest, part of you felt guilty about it, like something was wrong with you, like you were becoming cold, like you were growing distant in a way that might be selfish, or spiritually arrogant, or some kind of warning sign about who you were becoming. I need to say this clearly. Nothing is wrong with you. What is actually happening is that your discernment is increasing. Your capacity to sense what is life-giving and what is quietly draining that sensitivity is not malfunctioning. It is activating. And it is activating because you are being prepared for something that requires clarity, not compromise. There is a word in ancient Hebrew that most people read as simply meaning to see. But when you go back to the original language, you find 2 entirely different words doing 2 entirely different kinds of work. The word ra means to look, to notice what is in front of you, to register what is visible. But the word nabat means something deeper. It means to look with understanding, to perceive the meaning that lives underneath the surface of what you are seeing. Most people live their entire lives in Ra. They see what is in front of them, but the chosen one is being called into nabat, into seeing what is actually there, behind the familiar, underneath the comfortable. The reason certain people and spaces began draining you this week is that you are being calibrated to a new frequency. And at that frequency, not every voice belongs in the same position it has always held. Samuel did not recognize the voice of God the first time it called him. He heard something in the night and ran to a familiar person, assuming the familiar was where the message was coming from. It took 3 times, and the guidance of someone wiser, before he understood, this is not the voice you know. This is a new voice, asking you to enter a new level of sensitivity that will change everything. What called Samuel did not sound supernatural. It sounded exactly like something ordinary, and it was asking him to reorganize his entire life around a truth he had not yet received. Your draining shift this week is your version of that moment. Now, there is something that comes with this sign that almost nobody talks about. Because when you begin pulling back, when you begin protecting your energy, when you begin being less available to the people and environments that once had open access to you, guilt arrives. It is heavy. It makes you question whether you are abandoning people who need you, whether you are becoming someone unrecognizable, whether the distance you feel is something God is disappointed in. So let me speak to that guilt directly. You are allowed to outgrow. You are allowed to pull back from what drains you without offering anyone an explanation. You are allowed to protect what is being built inside you, even when the people around you cannot yet see what is being built. The distance is not rejection. The boundary is not betrayal. The silence is not cruelty. It is discernment. And discernment is a sign. The first 2 signs arrived in your body and in your relationships. The next 2 go deeper into the language. God speaks when he needs to reach you through your own mind and through what felt like his own absence. The 3rd sign did not arrive as a feeling. It arrived as a thought. And the reason it was so easy to dismiss is because it came dressed in something that looked exactly like your own mind, just running loose. This week, there was a thought that kept coming back. Not an anxious spiral, not the replay of something that went wrong. Something different from that, more like a direction, a specific idea, a person, a calling, a particular path that kept rising to the surface of your awareness and then getting pushed back down by the weight of whatever needed your attention next. Maybe you told yourself it was wishful thinking. Maybe you decided it was a distraction from the real responsibilities in front of you. Maybe you made a quiet promise to think about it when things settled down, and things, as they always do, refused to settle down. So, the thought came back. Again, quietly, persistent, and you kept moving past it. Here is what I need you to understand about the way God speaks through the mind. Anxious thoughts have a very specific signature. They spiral, they shrink, they pull you toward fear and away from clarity. They revisit the same painful territory with no new information and no new direction. But the impressions God places in the mind have an entirely different texture. They return, yes, but they do not spiral. They point, consistently, in one direction. Even when you try to reason them away, even when you replace them with something more practical, they come back pointing at the same thing they pointed at before. The thought that kept visiting you this week was not your imagination running out of things to do. It was a message that refuses to expire. I want to give you something that I call the 3-question discernment test. When a thought keeps returning, run it through these 3 questions. The first, does this thought connect to something larger than my current comfort? Not something that makes life easier right now, but something that points toward a life that would require a bigger version of you to live. Does following this thought require courage? Not recklessness. Courage, the kind that comes with a weight in the chest, not a rush of adrenaline. The third, does it come back, even when you actively choose to set it aside and move on? If the answer to all three is yes, what you have been experiencing is not overthinking. It is a calling, knocking at the door of your awareness and waiting for you to stop long enough to answer it. Paul spent years moving in the direct opposite direction of his true assignment. He was educated, disciplined, certain that the path he was on was the right one. He had credentials and conviction, and the weight of tradition behind him. And yet there was something, a persistent, directional, quietly returning thing that kept confronting him with a truth he had not yet accepted. He could not reason it away indefinitely. The day it confronted him directly, everything he had built his life around had to be reorganized around a completely different center. The thought you have been dismissing this week may be the reorganizing truth of your next season, not a distraction. The ones God uses most significantly rarely receive their assignments in one dramatic moment. They carry the thought for months, sometimes years, moving past it, returning to it, dismissing it, and finding it there again, until the day arrives when they are finally ready to say yes. Your repeated thought is not evidence of instability. It is evidence that your assignment has been patient with you, and that patience has a limit that is closer than you think. The fourth sign is the one that will challenge you most, because everything I have named so far has been about God reaching, the waking, the shifting, the returning thought. But this fourth sign looks, from the outside, like God going quiet. This week, there was a moment, maybe more than one, where your prayers felt like they were reaching a ceiling and going no further. Where the scripture that used to move something in you felt distant, like words on a page that had lost their warmth. Where the worship that once cracked something open in your chest felt flat and mechanical. Where you sat in the place where you have always been able to feel the connection, and the connection was simply not there. And something in you asked the question you did not want to ask. Have I drifted too far? Did I do something wrong? Is this what spiritual dryness feels like? And if so, how long does it last? I need to stop right here and say something carefully. That silence was not God's absence. Go back to Elijah, not to the fire on Mount Carmel, but to what came immediately after it, after the greatest display of divine power in his ministry, after the unmistakable, dramatic, public confirmation that God was real and present and on his side. Within days, he was hiding, he was running. He sat under a tree and asked to be taken out of the assignment entirely. The most dramatic supernatural experience of his life was immediately followed by the deepest spiritual crisis of his life. And God did not respond to that crisis with more fire. He responded with silence, then with something small and nourishing, then with a question, not an accusation, a question that invited Elijah to go deeper than the dramatic. And then came the famous sequence. The wind came, and God was not in the wind. The earthquake came, and God was not in the earthquake. The fire came, and God was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still, small voice. The silence you experienced this week was not the wind. It was not the earthquake. It was not the fire. It was the space that came after all of those things. The space where the still, small voice was always waiting. The space you had to be brought to by the absence of everything louder. God uses silence as architecture. What he is building during the quiet seasons does not require your commentary or your activity. It requires your trust. The silence is not emptiness, it is construction, happening at a level that is below the threshold of what you can hear when the noise of your life is turned all the way up. I want to pause here and share something that I need you to receive before I continue. I hear the Spirit saying over someone watching this right now, The silence was not my distance. It was my preparation. Every prayer that felt like it hit a ceiling was a prayer I caught on the other side. I did not go anywhere. I was building what you were not yet ready to hold. The quiet was not a verdict on your worth. It was a sign that I was about to move in ways that required a foundation you were still being given. What do you do in a season of silence? There are 3 things I want to give you. I call them the wilderness waiting protocol. And they are the difference between a silence that becomes a breakthrough and a silence that becomes a stumbling block. The first is this: protect your confession. What you speak about yourself and your season during the quiet becomes the atmosphere you are creating for what is being built. Speak as though the silence is purposeful, because it is. Speak as though you are in preparation, not abandonment, because you are. The words you choose in the silence are not small things, they are structural. The second, stay expectant without becoming desperate. Expectation is an open posture, the spiritual equivalent of facing the door and leaving the light on. Desperation is a closed fist. It cannot receive what is trying to arrive. There is a difference between hunger and panic. Stay hungry. Release the panic. In your mind right now, wherever you are. Let your hands relax and open. That small physical act is the posture of what I am describing. The third, refuse to interpret the silence as a verdict. God's quiet seasons are not his evaluations of your worth. Every significant figure who carried a significant assignment walked through a period where the heavens seemed sealed. Not because they were forgotten, because what was coming required more foundation than what had already been laid. The silence was not the story ending, it was the story going deeper. Now, let me bring you to the midpoint. 4 signs have been named, and I want you to notice what they have in common. The waking in the night, the draining shift in your relationships, the thought that kept returning, the season where heaven went quiet. These are not the signs of someone losing their footing. These are the signs of someone whose inner life is being upgraded for something their outer life has not yet caught up to. And the next 3 signs are more personal than anything we have covered so far. The 5th is going to name something you have been carrying in silence, something you have not told many people, maybe anyone. The 6th is going to address a pressure that has been following you and pretending to be something other than what it is. And the 7th sign, is the one I have been building toward from the beginning. The one that does not just add to the list, the one that recontextualizes every single sign that came before it, this entire week, and possibly the entire season of your life that led you to this moment. Stay. The 5th sign is the one I told you was personal, and I want you to think about someone specific before I say another word. Someone who used to occupy a certain place in your life, your week, your conversations, your plans. Someone whose presence used to feel like a given. And this week, something shifted. Maybe they pulled back without explanation. Maybe you pulled back without knowing exactly why. Maybe the distance arrived quietly, the way most significant things do not with a dramatic scene, but with a slow, undeniable cooling that both of you felt and neither of you named. That shift was not a breakdown, it was a sign. The people who are assigned to walk with you into your next season are not always the same people who walked with you through your last one. This is one of the most painful truths in the life of the chosen one, and I will not soften it more than it deserves to be softened, because softening it too much would be a disservice to what you are actually carrying. Some people came into your life for a chapter. Some people came for a lesson. And some people, and this is the hardest one, came to test whether you would love God's direction more than their company. Ruth understood this. She had lost her husband. She had lost the familiar structure of her life. She stood at a crossroads with her mother-in-law, and every practical reason pointed in one direction: go back to what you know, return to the comfortable. Stay where the path is clear and the faces are familiar. Her sister-in-law made that choice. There was nothing wrong with it. It was reasonable. But Ruth held to something that she could not fully explain and could not fully defend. She did not have a vision. She did not have a prophecy. She had a pull, a knowing that moved through her chest and told her that the life she was being called toward lived in the direction that made the least logical sense. And what looked like loss, the husband, the homeland, the familiarity was the architecture of the most significant relationship of her life, the most meaningful assignment of her life, and a legacy that outlasted anything she could have built by staying where it was safe. The relationship that shifted this week is not a punishment. It is a preparation. Now, let me speak to something you have probably not said out loud, because when the pulling back happens, when you start protecting your energy, when you start being less available to the people and the spaces that used to have open access to you, guilt comes. Specific, convincing. It tells you that you are becoming cold, that you are abandoning people who need you, that the version of you that is pulling away is a worse version, a more selfish version, a spiritually regressing version, and you listen to it, partly because you are a genuinely caring person, and partly because you were trained from very early on to believe that your value was directly connected to your availability. I need to say this as clearly as I know how to say it. You are allowed to outgrow. You are allowed to outgrow people, places, conversations, and versions of yourself that no longer carry what you are being asked to carry. You are allowed to protect what is being built inside you, even before it is finished, even before anyone else can see the shape of it. You are allowed to be less available without owing anyone the explanation for why. The boundary is not a betrayal. The distance is not a rejection. The silence is not cruelty. It is discernment in action, and discernment is a sign of maturity, not a sign of pride. Here is what I want you to do. In your mind, not out loud, think of the person or the space where you have felt the most guilt for pulling back. Hold that in your awareness for just a moment. Instead of asking yourself whether you were wrong to pull back, ask yourself this: what am I protecting? Not from them, what am I protecting for the next season? What is being built inside you right now that needs the energy you were giving away freely? Hold that for a moment. Whatever came to mind, that is what this season is for. That is what the clearing is making room for. The sixth sign is the one that has been disguising itself as stress. This week, there was a moment, maybe more than one, where the ground beneath your finances shifted. An unexpected bill. A number that did not add up the way it needed to. A door that looked like it was about to open, and then did not. A sense that the provision you were counting on was thinner than you had realized. And the way your body responded to that, the tightening, the mental scramble, the quiet panic you managed in private, while keeping your face arranged for everyone around you. That response felt like evidence that something was wrong. But here is what I need you to understand about the sixth sign. The sign was not that the provision tightened. The sign was the moment, the very specific moment when you had to decide whether you were going to collapse into fear or hold your footing in trust. That moment of decision is the sign, because what comes next requires someone who has already stood on shifting ground and chosen not to fall. There is a pattern that runs through the lives of every person who moved from where they were to where they were meant to be. Provision pressure came before provision breakthrough. Every single time. Not sometimes. Every time. The tightening is not the ceiling. The tightening is the pressure that comes just before the door opens. And it comes precisely because the enemy of your calling knows what is on the other side and would rather destabilize you now than deal with you when you have it. Here is a simple check I want you to run when provision tightens. I call it the resonance check. Ask yourself two questions. The first, am I reacting from fear or am I responding from faith? Fear contracts. Faith stays open. Fear makes decisions from the smallest version of the situation. Faith makes decisions from the largest possible truth. The second, what would the version of me who has already come through this do right now? Not the version of you who is in the middle of it. The version of you on the other side, looking back, who knows how it resolved? What would that person do today? Right now, wherever you are, take one breath that is slightly slower than the last one. That breath is the posture I am describing. Now, I have been building towards something throughout this entire message, and we have arrived at it. 6 signs have been named. And I want to take a moment to ask you something honest before we go any further. As we have gone through this list, the waking in the night, the draining shift, the repeated thought, the silence, the relationship that changed, the provision pressure, was there a part of you that kept waiting to feel something? Kept waiting for the confirmation to land fully, but something underneath kept saying, this is probably not really about me. I know that feeling. I know it well. And I want to name what it actually is before we go any further, because it is not what it pretends to be. It is not humility. Humility does not make itself smaller than the truth. What makes you dismiss good things when they are actually? For you, what makes you hold back from receiving the word that was sent specifically to find you is a pattern that formed a long time ago in a place that made a lot of sense at the time. The first time something good came close and then did not stay, your mind made a note. And then the second time, and then the third, and eventually the note became a policy. Do not fully believe the good thing is real until it has proven itself in ways that cannot be argued with. Because it hurts less to be cautious than to be wrong about something you wanted. That pattern is not who you are. It is what you built to protect yourself, and it has kept you safe. But it has also kept out things that were genuinely for you. And there is another layer underneath even that. Because some of you, watching this, are not just afraid of being wrong about the good thing. You are afraid of being right about it. Afraid of what it would actually mean if this really is your season. Afraid of the weight of what you would be expected to carry if you actually stepped into the fullness of what is being prepared for you. That fear is not weakness. I need you to hear that. The ones who moved into significant